Hey everyone, welcome back to Following My Journey with Ved. This week I'm just doing a video all about 2018 because I had an interesting year last year. As you remember, I had my bowel obstructions and I had gastroparesis where my stomach's paralyzed, and I hadn't had anything GI related happen since 2012. And so in 2018, I was already in my second semester of nursing school. Everything was going okay. Then February, there was one day I went to class, took a test, and I went home and I had this really uncomfortable feeling in my stomach. And it kind of felt like I had done a lot of sit-ups. It was just like I was in the sit-up position for like a day and I couldn't relieve that pain. It was more uncomfortable than anything, and I tried to lay down to see if that would help. I tried to unbutton my pants and nothing would make it feel better. And I was sitting on the couch and then I felt this really strong pain, like sharp in my belly button, and then it stopped. But then I felt this warm feeling go down my legs, and I got a metallic taste in my mouth, and I was like, okay, this is weird. And I started to feel very weak and shaky, so I told my mom, I was like, I think we should go get checked. So I texted my doctor, because usually if I have symptoms, he'll tell me whether he thinks I should go get checked or not in the ER. So we headed to the ER, they did a CT scan, they did labs, everything came out completely normal, but they went ahead and admitted me to the hospital for observation. So I was in the hospital for 5 days, from that Monday to Friday, and I was, I guess, fine. Um, the pain was better and they didn't find anything wrong, but they were just observing me because we never know what can happen, and sometimes I just need to get some rest from my bowels, so not taking anything in my mouth and just getting IV fluids, and that can help. So I was lucky enough that I didn't miss any class. It was during nursing school, and well, I missed one day of class and I didn't have anything until Saturday when I had clinicals, so I lucked out. If there was any chance to be in the hospital, it was then. So we never really found out what was wrong. But after that incident, all March, like February, March, all that year, I couldn't really eat anything. Like, no matter what I would try to eat, I had done a liquid diet because they usually recommend liquid diets just to help my colon calm down and help it get back to where it's supposed to be. So I was drinking green juices, broth, Jello. That was literally my diet for months. And I had mentioned before that I had gained a lot of weight in the wheelchair. I gained like 30 pounds, and I lost all of that and more in a period of like 4 or 5 months. And no matter what I would eat, my stomach would start hurting. It would just start cramping right away. I tried to drink Ensures, and so I was doing my clinical rotations plus class plus going weekly to my doctor to get IV hydration, so that way I would get all the necessary electrolytes that I needed, and to make sure that I had enough energy. Like, I remember there was even one time that I slept 2 hours the night before I had a clinical. I had to be at the hospital at 6:30. I had 2 hours of sleep, and I was just drinking broth and eating Jello. So it was a pretty hard time to balance going to school, doing my clinicals, and then having to go to the doctor every week all day for IV hydration. And then it wasn't until May that I went to see a new GI doctor I hadn't seen, which is a gastroenterologist, and they look at your digestive system and everything. And I had an old one that I used to see before when I was diagnosed with the gastroparesis, and I hadn't seen him in a while. So we went to this new one because he does research with gastroparesis, and he ordered some tests. So I got retested for gastroparesis. It turns out I didn't have it, so I have a normal stomach. And then I was still having symptoms, so he had ordered a glucose breath test to test for bacteria in my stomach. That came back negative. And then it wasn't until July when we did a fructose breath test, and it turns out that I have a fructose malabsorption. So anytime that I eat foods, drink juices that are high in fructose, I get symptoms like bloating and everything. So we figured out that that was probably the cause of what I was going through last year. And it made sense because in February, before I landed in the hospital, the first incident, I was taking big bowls, big Tupperwares of fruit to class. I had 4-hour lectures, and that was my snack because I was trying to eat healthy. So I think that's kind of what kicked off the whole year of my GI issues last year, was eating all the fruit. And I have to take Miralax daily, which is to help me have bowel movements regularly to take the pressure off of my colon so nothing gets stuck in there. So I was taking the Miralax with apple juice, which has a lot of fructose, so that makes sense that was causing all my symptoms. And just also a side note, the doctor that I saw, he didn't really understand vEDS. We get worried about constipation because it's a risk for perforation, and he was like, your intestines are strong. They're constantly working and pushing like all the time, like don't worry. And I was like, 18-year-olds don't have bowel obstructions, like who does? And he was like, I'm sitting on a bowel obstruction, your mom is, we all are. Like, he was really downplaying everything, and I was like, okay. So that was in July. The next month, in August, it was my finals week of my 7th semester, so my second to last semester, and I woke up late. I remember laying in bed all day, and I got up to eat around 4. I had pancakes, and I started to feel this pain like in my belly button. And normally when I get pains, I kind of just rest, wait it out, see if it gets better, and if it gets worse, I'll go get checked. But I never know when it's an emergency. So I got this pain. I told my mom, like, I'm gonna go lay down. I feel a little uncomfortable and I feel nauseous, so I'm just gonna lay down and see if that helps. And the pain wasn't getting better. And this pain wasn't as bad as my bowel obstructions, so I didn't really know how to take it. But then after a while, it started to radiate to my back, so it kind of felt like period cramps, so I still was kind of like, I don't know. And then I started to get the chills, so I was like, okay, maybe we should go. So we ended up driving to the ER, and they did all the scans and everything, and I sat there for like 6 hours before they told me that my colon had perforated, so my colon actually ruptured. And I remember being, like, the more it went on, I was in more and more pain. Like, it really hurt to use the restroom. I would actually scream to even just pee, and I couldn't walk. And so that's a big concern for colon perforation, and we wanted to try to avoid surgery, just again because surgeries are very risky with vEDS, and then it's even worse when there's a lot of inflammation going on in the body. So what happened was they admitted me to the hospital, and every 2 hours they were going and they were checking my stomach to make sure that the symptoms weren't getting worse. Because if I had symptoms that were showing those, like, bad inflammation, or that the contents outside of my intestines were causing an infection, then they were going to have to rush into surgery. So every 2 hours they were touching my abdomen, and they were kicking the bed to see if that would cause me pain. And the CT scan and the x-ray had showed that there was air outside of my intestines. That's how they know I had the perforation. And it hurt so bad that when the doctors would put the stethoscope, they would barely touch my stomach. It would hurt. It would hurt ugly. And so they were like, we're just going to give it a few days, just keep monitoring. I had fevers. I had 102 fevers. They were constantly giving me the IV Tylenol, and they were going to do a follow-up CT scan. So that was on the Thursday. Then on Sunday, they did the CT scan, and it turns out that my perforation had closed off on its own. It had walled off, but because everything that leaked out, I had developed 2 abscesses, one right by my bladder and one by the rectum. So the one by the bladder was fine, but that's also was causing pain, is because the abscesses were pushing on those organs. And so the plan was to get a drain inserted to drain the abscess, which is way better and easier than surgery for me. When we did they inserted the drain, it was on a Monday, and they took me down to interventional radiology, and they had to use imaging to make sure that they were going to put it in the right place and everything. So the drain went in through my right butt cheek, and it was honestly one of the worst pains in my life. It went through 10 centimeters of, like, my body and my skin to get to the abscess. So you can imagine, like, how much it was that they had to put it in there. So then they had the tube in there, and then they had, like, a little drain to collect everything from the abscess. And I had that in for 4 days. And it also happened to be on a time, I only had a week off in between semesters, so it happened to be during my summer vacation. And I was honestly pretty worried that I wasn't going to be able to graduate with my cohort because of the perforation. I didn't know how it was going to be, and I had one of my close friends in nursing school. She was really like, you're going to do this, and she helped me take out my loan and everything, get me ready to start my last semester, so I wouldn't have been able to do it if it wasn't for her. I did relatively okay after that. I mean, I was pretty weak after the perforation. I started school right away. I think I was discharged from the hospital Friday. I started school on Wednesday, and then I was doing okay. Like, I would get tired and everything. And then in October, I was doing my rotations. I was at UMC, and I was following my preceptor, and I got a weird pain, and then I felt my heart racing. I was like, this is weird, and I felt kind of weak, but so I just went to go sit down for a little bit because I was like, I had a long day. Maybe it was just, I had a long day. I'm just going to rest. So I went home, and it wasn't getting better, and then I actually had a temperature, an elevated temperature, so I went back to UMC, to the ER, and they did the CT scan, and I got kind of mixed things there. I'm still unclear of what happened, but they thought that I had a fistula develop between the rectum and my fallopian tube. And I need to interrupt myself here really fast just to say that a fistula is like a little opening or hole. And so that means that when I had the fistula, they thought it was a hole that formed between the rectum and the sigmoid colon and the fallopian tube. So they had like a connection there, and that's why there was inflammation. And the CT scan had also shown that I had air and leftover liquid and stuff and inflammation from the perforation still in October all around there. So it was just all a mess, which is apparently it can be a complication for vEDS patients after GI issues. So I was in the hospital for 3 or 4 days, I don't remember, but it happened to be on a time too where it was okay for me to miss school. I was just doing my clinical rotation, so all I had to do was make up those hours. And so that was it. They said I didn't have a fistula, but the report says that there was a tract there, so I don't know what happened with that. But I was discharged. They gave me 2 to 3 weeks off, and I was like, I'll be fine, I can do it. But then I started to feel bad again, and it felt like I was having PMS symptoms every day. I was getting cramps, and I don't know if it's TMI, but I was bleeding a lot, like a period, and I was very weak. I couldn't get up from the couch. I had the heating pad on all the time, which is not something that normally happens with me. And I was very moody and emotional. I remember there was one time I was eating dinner in the dark, and I was just crying. I don't know. It was rough. But we discovered that my fallopian tube had a bunch of inflammation, so I'm guessing they don't know if that caused my colon inflammation in October or the colon caused the fallopian tube inflammation. But after that, we increased my birth control to help with all those symptoms, and I got better. So it was pretty hard because right when I went back to school, I was starting a new rotation, so I had to make up my I had to do my rotation at the high school in addition to making up my 12, 13-hour shifts at the hospital. So I was doing all that just so I can graduate on time. I wasn't even sure if I would be able to do it. And feeling the way that I was, having to take Tylenol and have the heating pad on all the time. And then that was in November. So December, I graduated, and then I had my yearly MRA scans, which they check my blood vessels just to make sure that I don't have any aneurysms or anything. I have that every year. And they added an MRI of the pelvis just to check on the fallopian tube and the colon and all that, and it showed that everything was gone. So in December, we got the scan, and it showed that it was completely gone, absorbed. So it was a really long year, GI-wise, 2018, from February all the way to December. I don't even know how I managed to finish graduating nursing school. I mean, I would have been able to do without my friends and my family and all the support that I had. But I mean, if there were times to be in the hospital, it happened to just work out on weeks where I could miss school and I could still graduate on time. And I was lucky to avoid surgery because a lot of people with vEDS, they have the surgery, they end up with the colostomy bag, which is where they bring your intestine and opening out to the skin, and then you have a bag there, and the stool comes out through there. So a common sight in people with vEDS, that's where their colon perforates in the sigmoid colon. So they've been recommending surgery to electively take that out because it's better to take it out when I'm doing good as opposed to when there's a bunch of inflammation and everything. And that's been a big decision that we've been thinking about for the past year. But next week I'm going to talk about my seizure and shoulder dislocations. That'll be another fun story.